Hello everybody, welcome back to another Modern Deck Tech. Today, I've got a food combo deck. So, food treats. Yes.
Treats.
So, this deck is really cool. There's basically two ways that this deck can win. The main one is to assemble a cheeky little infinite combo here involving Viscera Seer, Cauldron Familiar, and Samwise Gamgee. If you have all three of these cards in play at the same time, you can basically just win the game on the spot. So the way that works is you sack the Familiar to the Viscera Seer. The scry doesn't really matter so much. And if you have a food in play, I guess you do need a food to get this all kicked off, but you can usually get one. So you sack the Cauldron Familiar to the Viscera Seer, putting that in your graveyard. You sacrifice a food to bring back the Familiar. But Samwise Gamgee says that when a creature enters, it enters with a food. So Cauldron Familiar comes in, adds a food. You can then sack it to the Seer, and then use the food that it came in with to bring it back to life. And when he comes back to life, or when he enters the battlefield rather, you drain your opponent for 1. So you could just do that 20 times, win the game.
Or however many, in case they gain a bunch of life.
That too.
Infinite.
Yeah. So this deck doesn't entirely rely on just naturally drawing all three of these cards, of course. So there are some other ways to fetch them out. Those being Eladamri's Call and Eldritch Evolution. Eldritch Evolution is kind of fun because you can sack the Familiar to get another combo piece, and then just bring the Familiar back with whatever food you have. Yeah. And then Eladamri's Call, of course, can just search out any creature. So pretty cool. Eldritch Evolution, of course, you sack something and then you get something that costs up to 2 extra converted mana cost more than the thing that you sacrificed. So, pretty good. And the other way that you win with this deck, like I mentioned before, Feasting Troll King. Just a bunch of 7/6 Vigilance Trample beatdowns. So this is a card that normally costs 6 mana. It's a 7/6 Vigilance Trample, like I said. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it from your hand, you create 3 foods, and you can sack 3 foods to return it from your graveyard to the battlefield directly. And you can only activate that during your turn. So assembling 3 foods in this deck is really easy, and so if you can get him in your graveyard, then it's pretty common to have like a turn 3 cast the Feasting Troll King out of your graveyard type of situation, if you have that. And you can also ramp into him the old-fashioned way using the card next to him, Tireless Provisioner. So that's the 2 ways that this deck wins, the infinite combo and just massive troll beats. Just beat down. But there's a bunch of other cards that enable this, so let's start here. We're going to start with Gilded Goose. We have 3 of these. It's a 0/2 flyer that when it enters the battlefield, you get a food token, and you can pay 2 and tap it to create a food token, which is incredibly useful in this deck. Normally, you just want him to be able to sack the food and make a mana, sort of like a less effective Birds of Paradise, but in this particular deck, making a food every turn is pretty solid.
It's very useful.
Then we have the Underworld Cookbook, so you can tap this to discard a card and create a food token. Of course, the ideal play with this is either to discard a Cauldron Familiar, making a food and then sack the food to get the Familiar back, or discard Feasting Troll King, make a food, and then if you have 2 other foods, get him back that turn. Pretty solid.
Yeah. Can't go wrong there.
Yeah. And of course you can also pay for and sack the Underworld Cookbook to get a creature back to your hand, which is nice in late game if you are missing like a combo piece. Let's say they've traded for a Samwise or something and you have these other 2. You can always just Cookbook back the 3rd option from your graveyard and just win on the spot that way. Then we have 2 Witch's Ovens. It's possible that this should be 3 and the card next to it should also be 3, but not too sure on the numbers just yet. But Witch's Oven lets you tap, sacrifice a creature to create a food, and if that creature's power is 4 or greater, I believe, yes, then you create 2 foods instead. So obviously Witch's Oven pairs really well with Cauldron Familiar, just as like a constant every turn you're getting them for 1.
Here's 1/1 blocker that slowly drains you out.
Mm-hmm. And also, Witch's Oven, if someone points a removal spell at, say, a Feasting Troll King, like a Path or something, Witch's Oven can sack it for 2 foods, which is almost enough to just get it back on its own, which is pretty sweet.
Very nice.
So that's another card that I found very useful just to do this in response to removal spells, and you can get some little value that way.
Exile can really
Yeah.
ruin your day.
Yeah, especially if it's combo pieces, too.
Useful.
Yeah. So, next to that, we have Many Partings. This is kind of a fun card. It's a sorcery speed, 1 mana. You can search your library for a basic land, put it into your hand, which is not all that useful, but it also comes with a food token. So, playing a bunch of these as just a 1 mana create a food, it's fine in this deck. It's not good in other decks, but it's fine in this deck. But having a bunch of these lets me actually run a fewer lands, because if I have one of these in my opener, all I need is 1 mana. I can keep like 6 spells in a single land, as long as some of them are Many Partings, because then I can just grab basic lands off of that. So pretty sweet there.
Essentially a land that makes a food. So
yeah, awesome.
In a deck that's trying to assemble them, makes sense.
And then we have 2 dispatches. So this, of course, taps target creature, or with Metalcraft, will exile that creature instead. And the benefit of having this card, of course, is you're making a ton of food. You even have some cookbooks and witches' ovens or whatever. So assembling Metalcraft, not really that hard, since foods are, in fact, artifacts.
Yes, foods and treasures are artifacts. So getting it up to 3 is not that difficult, but difficult enough that you wouldn't want the full set.
Yeah. And then on this top row here, we have a bunch of other things. So we have 3 Tireless Provisioners. This is a 3/2 for 3, and it has landfall. Whenever a land enters, I create either a food or a treasure. So that's pretty solid. Obviously, creating foods, that's what this deck wants to do. But the creating a treasure option actually allows you to get into range of casting Feasting Troll King, which is pretty good.
Yes, it definitely speeds up him, especially like if you have a fetch land to follow it up with, then you're probably getting him on the next turn.
Yeah, just make some treasures. He basically acts like a Lotus Cobra in that sense, but even a little bit better, because you can keep the treasures around. You don't have to use them the turn you make them, like you do with Lotus Cobra.
Yes,
so that's
and also
sweet.
The ability to use foods later in the game is also helpful.
Yes, definitely. And if you have like some Troll Kings going or whatever, having this as you just make extra fuel for the Troll King to keep coming back. Pretty good. Then we have a bunch of one-ofs that are really fun. So we have 1 copy of Grist, the Hunger Tide. This is really just in here because of Eldritch Evolution. Sometimes
it is a hilarious interaction.
Yeah.
It is a 1/1 insect when it's not on the field.
Yeah, when it's anywhere other than on the field. In your deck, in your graveyard, in exile. It's just a 3-mana 1/1. So, pretty sweet. Obviously, like Eldritch Evolutioning, Cauldron Familiar away to get a Grist on like turn 3 or whatever. Pretty solid. Or turn 2 even if you have a Gilded Goose in play. So you can go up to make an insect. You can repeat that process if you mill other insects, but this is literally the only insect in the deck, so
it's not happening.
No,
but
so he just makes a 1/1 and mills a card. But the mill a card is also funny, because you could mill like a Troll King or a Cauldron Familiar.
Yes.
And get stuff going that way. Then he -2s to sacrifice a creature, and when you do, you destroy a creature or a Planeswalker. So, again, very good with stuff that recurs. And then his -5 is each opponent loses life equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Probably not doing that one too much, but it could win out of nowhere, potentially.
Yes, he is just a useful card, because you can, as you said, like Cauldron Familiar, Eldritch Evolution, and then you can probably get the Familiar back and then sacrifice it to kill a thing.
Yeah. You can also Eladamri's Call for Grist also, because of the creature thing. It is a creature card when it's not in play. So, really fun one-of there. Then we have a Lembas?
Lembas bread.
Lembas bread? Is that how you say it?
One small bite is enough to feed a man for an entire day.
Well, it seems that way, because this is food with a bunch of extra abilities. So when it enters the battlefield, you scry 1 and draw a card. It's basically like an opt. And then it has the typical food thing. You pay 2, sack it to gain 3 life. But it also shuffles back into your library after you've used it. So sacking it to Familiar or Troll King or what have you, it will shuffle back in. Pretty good. So then we have Giant Opportunity. I just have a single copy of this. The original deck that I played had some more of these, but I think one copy is fine, if even that. But this lets you, for 3 mana, sacrifice 2 foods to make a 7/7, or create 3 foods. So making a 7/7 kind of nice if you are a little light on action. It's like a 5th copy of Troll King, kind of. And sacrificing 2 foods, not that hard. But the creating 3 foods is actually useful with Troll King in particular.
So it's basically like make 7/7,
yeah,
or make 7/7 later,
yeah,
7/6 later
with Vigilance and Trample. Yeah, it's kind of fun. Then we have 1 copy of Craterhoof Behemoth. So this is kind of a fun of. It's in here because it costs 8, and conveniently, Eldritch Evolution allows you to trade a Troll King, which costs 6, in for a Craterhoof Behemoth. So you can do some fun shenanigans potentially, where you have like some Gilded Geese or any of these like tiny little insignificant creatures out, and then out of nowhere you could Eldritch Evolution away a Troll King to go get a Craterhoof Behemoth and probably just win the game right there. Pretty cool as a one of. And then of course you can also potentially cast him with ramp provided by Tireless Provisioner, just in the form of landfall triggers making treasures. So that is the spells in this deck. Lands are pretty straightforward. We have 4 Verdant Catacombs, 3 Windswept Heath, 2 Temple Garden, 2 Overgrown Tomb. I'm going to skip these for right now. We have 1 Swamp and 4 Forests. We have 5 basics, of course, because many partings you're going to want to have some basics to fetch.
Basics to go find.
Yeah. And then we have our fun lands. So we have 1 Boseiju Who Endures. This is just a good card that lets you remove an artifact, enchantment, or non-basic land, and then they go and exchange that for a basic land. Or it's just a green mana that comes in untapped. So pretty solid. And then Gingerbread Cabin. It's a forest, so you can fetch it with any of your fetch lands, and it enters tapped unless you control 3 or more other forests. But if it enters untapped, you create a food token. So if your opponent thinks you don't have any food, and they send in something with, I don't know, let's say 1 toughness, and you have a Cauldron Familiar in your graveyard, you can fetch land for a Gingerbread Cabin if you're on 4, create a food token, and then sack that to get your familiar back. And then block, of course.
Yes.
So pretty fun little interaction there. And just having a forest that creates a food token and a food deck.
I mean, yeah.
Pretty good.
A land that makes a food, you can't really go wrong with in a food deck.
So that is Food Combo. And we'll see you next week.